Welcome to this new edition of In Conversation with the Dean, and today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Professor Andy Hoffman, professor at University of Michigan in Business and Sustainability. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today. I know you had a busy time. We were at a conference together a minute ago on research impact. We might have the chance to talk about this. Andy has published like more than 100 books and papers on sustainability and climate action. And I think one distinguished characteristics is that you started to talk about that topic long before it became in fashion. And you know, as a dedicated researcher, you focused immediately on what matters, and certainly what mattered to you and what matters to all of us who care about this planet. So before we get into the topic, would you mind telling me a little bit more about yourself and maybe what brought you to academia eventually?
This is a true story. I was tricked into academia. I didn't really intend to do this. I got a master's degree at MIT maybe I should back up a little bit. So my undergraduate degree was chemical engineering for reasons I don't know.
Okay.
It was a hard degree. I like chemistry and math. But I got interested in environmental issues at that time. One thing that drove me is I saw Love Canal happen. The chemical disaster at Love Canal, and I saw that and I said, that's how I can use chemical engineering for a good purpose to make sure that never happens again. My first job out of college was with the EPA. After 2 years, I realized I didn't like it. I didn't like government. But being a dutiful son who followed the rules, I did what I was brought up to do. If you want to improve your life, you go back to school. So I applied to graduate schools for public policy, which looking back now makes absolutely no sense. But I didn't like government, but I wanted to be John F. Kennedy. So I was going in that direction. And then I got what I was asked for. I got acceptances to Harvard and Berkeley for public policy. And I froze, and I couldn't do it. And I was really in a quandary. It was a very difficult moment for me. And
you froze what? Psychologically, you felt like
this is a mistake. This isn't the right direction. And I'd helped a friend build a deck, and I got a charge out of it. And so I don't know what possessed me, but I started looking for jobs as a carpenter. And I answered an ad for a carpenter's job on Nantucket, which is an island off of Cape Cod. And I flew down and accepted the job.
And so you became a carpenter?
I became a carpenter. I had to sit down with my parents and say, I have a chemical engineering degree. I have acceptances at Harvard. No, that was actually UMass Amherst.
Okay,
MIT comes later. But I have acceptances at Harvard and Berkeley. I'm going to be a carpenter.
I'm sure they were thrilled.
They were not happy about this. And so that was a difficult conversation. I had a lot of friends who said, you're throwing your life away. What are you doing? But it was an important step for me because it was really the first time in my life I said, this is my life and I'm going to do what I want with it.
Okay.
And I lucked into something truly extraordinary because that house, I was the carpenter, but it was for the CEO of General Electric. It was for Jack Welch. And we finished that house, and then I became a supervisor, supervising large-scale custom homes. I built 4 homes. The smallest was 7,000 square feet. I don't know how that translates into meters. The biggest was 29,000 square feet. I built a 29,000 square foot house on 300 acres.
2,000 square meters or something.
It's a monster. I mean, it had 17 heating and cooling zones. The architects drew it up as a 20-unit condo, and it worked. I mean, it was a monster home. And it really is truly one of my proudest accomplishments. But I was young, I was impetuous, I had a falling out with my boss. I was running the jobs, and he was getting all the money. And so I applied to go back to grad school. My goal was to get an engineering and an architecture degree and design and build my own houses.
Sure.
I didn't get into a single architecture school. I learned later that architecture schools think of themselves more as art schools. I submitted my portfolio of houses I built. They didn't care. But I did get into engineering. And so I went to MIT for my master's in engineering. And environmental issues became much more interesting. When I was at EPA, it was enforcement. It was combative with corporations. And then when I was in grad school, it started to become interesting. Companies wanted to do this for strategic reasons. And so my advisor said, I'll fund a PhD. And I said, no way. He kept asking. I kept saying, no way. Finally, he said, let's have lunch. I said, Fred, I'm not doing a PhD. He goes, I got something else for you. So he says, I'm starting a consortium of companies interested in environmental issues. I want you to run it. You'll fly around the world. You'll meet these CEOs. You'll collect a salary and you can take classes at MIT. I was like, where do I sign up? And then a week before classes, the first trip to Japan to Komatsu, the CEO was like, I don't know who Hoffman is. I don't want to meet with him. I want to meet with you, with my advisor. And then I went to sign up for classes, and they said, oh, you didn't read the fine print. You can't take classes unless you've been an employee a year, and then you can only take one a year. So I went into his office and said, your deal's falling apart. I was really angry. And his assistant said, we still have that fellowship. And I said, what do I owe you if I do the fellowship? They said, absolutely nothing. And I said, I'll take the fellowship. And I stormed out of his office. And that's how I started a PhD.
That's how you started your PhD. And your PhD was then therefore on what?
Well, it was a joint between engineering and business. And I cared about environmental issues. That's what I wanted to focus on.
Okay.
And you talked about it being early. When I tried to get people to be on my committee, most people in the business school, both at MIT and at Harvard, said, what are you doing here? This has nothing to do with business. Go over to the School of Public Policy.
When was that, if I may ask?
1991 through 1995.
Okay, so
And
early 90s, yeah.
My first job interview was at INSEAD, where they actually said to me, we really love your stuff on institutional theory, but we think you're too focused on the environment, and they turned me down. And now, all those people that turned me down to be on my committee, INSEAD, they all list sustainability as what they focus on. I was lucky. I was lucky to get into something just as the wave was about to crest.
Sure.
So I would love to take credit for what happened. I was merely at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, but you had the idea of
Yeah.
of focusing on an issue that was, in fairness, only started to get momentum in the public eyes as an issue that needs to be tackled by everyone, and most importantly, the business community.
Yeah. And to help your viewers understand, when I was doing my PhD was when climate change, global warming as it was called, emerged. It really wasn't an issue when I started. I remember conversations with people, what do you think of this? Is this real? It was that new. It gives you a sense of how old I am.
I know, but no, well, not that old, because that was 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think it is important for our audience, and particularly the younger generation, to realize that, when the blame is being put on the generation before and the generation before this, their parents or us and our parents, it was certainly not a concern for our parents whatsoever. They were delighted to grow up in an economy that was thriving, where all of a sudden there was an abundance of school. When you go back the generation before, certainly the one that had to endure the war in Europe, had scarcity was everywhere, and in Ireland that feature prolonged up until the 90s anyway. But so that's important, and then of course the public debate started. We started to see the effect. Yes, there was a few people as early as the 70s that were starting to warn us about the collapse of biodiversity and climate change and the rising temperature. But they were very local and very small voices.
And an important data point to try and point out to my students also is that when I was born in 1961, there were 3.5 billion people, 3 billion people on Earth. Today there are 7.5. So if you think about that, it took Homo sapiens millennia to go from 0 to 3, and in my short lifetime, that's more than doubled. And if I live to 2050, it'll more than triple.
Yeah.
The impact on the environment is enormous.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's exactly. I think it took us up until 1850. It was 1 billion, and then it only started to go up. And then, as you say,
post World War II.
Post World War II, all of a sudden we moved from 1.5 to
Scientists call that the Great Acceleration.
Yeah. So it's a wall, and of course has an impact. So tell us a little bit more about your research and your concern, and so you land in that field and you're starting to make a contribution. What are been those contribution, from your perspective and from the business community perspective?
Yeah.
What do you see we should do? We should have done? What was like your initial approach, and then how it has evolved in the last couple of years?
Well, I approached environmental issues as cultural issues.
Okay.
And so institutional, cultural, same terms in my book. And so as the market evolves, this is a cultural shift of our understanding of the role of business to solve these problems. My first book was looking at the evolution of corporate thought toward the environment. It was called From Heresy to Dogma. And that line came to me from it was based on my dissertation, and part of that was a case study of the Amoco Corporation. They actually let me get in and go through all their records. It was quite a lucky thing to be able to do.
I don't think many corporations would allow you to do that nowadays.
It's a great story because halfway through I was really burned out and I needed a summer job just to clear my head. And so I wrote to the environmental vice president at Amoco, said, "You got anything?" And they gave me a summer internship in the pipeline company. And I had to figure out how much the Clean Air Act Amendment is going to cost them, which was a great experience because they have like thousands of miles of pipeline. They have thousands of those big multi-million gallon tanks, which are basically just wide points in the pipe. If the refinery doesn't need oil, it fills up. When it needs the oil, it drains out. And my first question, okay, give me an inventory of the tanks. And they didn't have one. Oil companies had so much money. If you need one tank, put in two. If you need two pumps, put in four. You just got to keep the oil moving. And so I created a database that they kept calling the Hoffman database, the first database. But the important point is that I just did that as a one-off.
Right.
Then through those connections, I said I'd like to use Amoco as a case study. I had to give a presentation to the board, and general counsel stood up and said, "There's no way we're letting you in here to do that," just as you said. And luckily I had people inside the company who said, "Andy's a legitimate researcher, this isn't muckraking." And so we had an agreement that I would go in, I would look through it, I would talk to them and show them what I'm doing. They didn't exercise any kind of cutting things out. And the title of the book comes from Wally Quanstrom. He was the environmental vice president, and he had been pushing them for a long time to say, we got to get ahead on these environmental issues. And then finally there was a senior executives meeting, and the CEO said, "We expect," this is like in the early 90s, "we expect environmental issues become more stringent both here and abroad. And for an environmentally progressive company like Amoco, we expect this to provide strategic advantage." This is the 90s.
Wow.
And the head of UK operations leaned over to Wally and said, "How does it feel to hear your heresy become dogma?" And I just loved that metaphor, so I made that the title of the book.
All right. And so, is it dogma still nowadays for most companies? And
Well,
what are they doing about it?
The dogma keeps changing, though.
Right.
The environmental issue hasn't stood still. Like I said, climate change really wasn't an issue when I was doing my dissertation. And so the issue keeps evolving and growing and changing. In fact, I don't even think of climate change or species extinction or ocean acidification. I don't think of these as environmental problems. I think of them as systems breakdowns. We are causing them through the social and economic systems and political systems we've created, and we are altering the systems of the earth. That's not an environmental issue. That's a systems breakdown.
Okay, so your focus, and then now your focus of analysis, like especially from a business point of view, is that capitalist system then?
Yeah.
Is that become like what?
The market. Capitalism.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how it's changed.
Okay. So what can you tell us about this? Like how? So first, a very short answer on why do you believe the system, as you describe it, or the market system or the capitalist system, is responsible for the climate change and the loss of biodiversity and etc. And then we'll go through the history of that system.
Yeah, I mean, these problems are not externalities. They're not unintended consequences. They're the product of the system as designed.
Okay.
We have embedded in the system belief in unlimited economic growth.
Right.
That's actually not possible in a fixed system. We have the idea that government should have a limited role in the market, let the market do its magic, which I just think is nonsense. The market, capitalism, are a set of human-made institutions in the service of humans, and if they don't work anymore, then they need to be adjusted and fixed. And so they are causing problems not just in the environmental, but in the social domain. The level of income inequality we have right now, we haven't seen since the Gilded Age. And capitalism is doing that. Thomas Piketty, that's his whole point, is that capitalism by design, the rich get richer through their invested capital. If you make your money off your labor, you're not keeping up with the growth of invested capital.
To keep up, especially in the last couple of years.
Right.
Okay, so I think you develop in one of many of your outlet and books this notion that we need to address climate change and climate sustainability issue by looking at that system of capitalism. But capitalism, and the reason why it is such a successful system, is because of its adaptability.
Right.
And so the current version of capitalism that we have, we may have a very big issue with it, but it was not always like the version that existed. So, rather than being described as a socialist or something along those lines, I think maybe to reassure the audience, you might want to describe like how capitalism has morphed over the years, relatively briefly, but
Yeah, I mean, with my students, all of us, you and I, all our peers, all our students have only experienced one variant of capitalism. And it's one we've had since the 70s, shareholder capitalism. In most Western economies, that's what's in play. And so for many students, it's unquestioned. And many faculty, it's unquestioned. And yet it has evolved over time. Certainly, what we have right now is shareholder capitalism. What preceded that has been called managerial capitalism. We had the large corporations forming. Alfred Chandler talked about the visible hand, the managerial class running these companies, and it had a very strong role of government in the market. Keynesian economics dominated. In the 70s, we had stagflation. Prior to that, economists didn't think you could have inflation and unemployment at the same time. It was one or the other. Now we had both, stagflation. And the Keynesian economists were flummoxed. They didn't know what to do. So in come the neoclassical economists are saying, the answer is get government out of the way. Let the market do what it does. Milton Friedman, Hayek, the Chicago School. And so that is the variant we have now. And I don't want to debate whether it was the right one for its time. A better question is, have the times changed so much? We just had Paul Pullman on campus, and he made a point that I just really liked. He goes,
Paul Pullman, remind the people, CEO
former CEO of Unilever.
Yeah.
And he said, in Friedman's time, you had shareholders. Today, he says, we have share traders. They don't care about the fundamentals of the company. They're not invested for the long term in the success of the company. They just want their money and they want to leave. And so Friedman's arguments kind of fall apart there. Are they really the owners, or are they just opportunists trying to exploit the company for their own personal gain? It's the latter. And so the basic precepts of shareholder capitalism, is the purpose of the firm to make money for the shareholder? I think that is seriously problematic if you want to have stable companies. I mean, I could walk probably downstairs, I can do this in my school, finish this sentence, what's the purpose of the firm? They will say, make money for the shareholder. And then when I teach them, actually, there's no legal requirement that they do this. And they look at me just stunned. And then it doesn't fit the actual practical application of management in a business. Peter Drucker said the purpose of the firm is to identify and serve a market. Colin Meyer, the dean of the Said School, said the purpose of business is to solve society's problems profitably. That's a much better definition than make money for the shareholder. Because if it's the shareholder, then your job as a CEO is just follow the share price. That's all you do.
Yeah.
And whether you make good products, that's secondary.
It's irrelevant, yeah.
And
it's also short term, every quarter,
right.
and you see the effect of that, like, an announcement of restructuring coupled with, like, an investment, a reasonable investment in AI might boost your share prices,
And then they're going to cash out, and they're going to
exactly.
right.
So you've got those phenomena. So I think you made a.
And I would also add that capitalism has evolved since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. I'm not saying he invented capitalism; he merely wrote it down. What he saw, he codified it, he set it up, and it's evolved over time. And it has also been diverse. There are multiple forms of capitalism. Nordic capitalism, very different than American capitalism, very different than Chinese capitalism. There's a variant there, and that stuns my students as well.
Yeah, of course.
And I think this is an important lesson that I've tried to bring into business education, because I have a course called Reexamining Capitalism. And this generation, according to surveys from Gallup, are disenchanted with capitalism. Yet in my first class, students at a business school, graduate students, I say, define capitalism, and they can't. And so off we go. Okay, you need to understand this. You need to understand what is capitalism, how it was originally conceived, what were its original critics, how has it evolved, who are the critics today. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs, Mariana Mazzucato, there's a lot of great stuff.
Okay, so if we summarize, like, capitalism has evolved from being multi-stakeholders in its purpose and its to something that became solely focused on maximizing shareholder values in the short term, and this attitude has led to profit maximization and the use of externality we'll still use as natural resources to maximize your profit. Now, the point you make is that that's fine. We're not going to even judge whether or not that was successful or reasonable at the time in the 70s and things like that. The reality is the situation now. And the situation now is that the system, i.e. the natural ecosystem, is changing, is being affected. It is being affected by a human-made system that we're going to label shareholder capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, and within human society, there is also like the wage disparity and the poverty and the wage gap and all of those things.
And gender gap. And
all of those aspects. So what you are saying is, now we need to change the current system, shareholder capitalism, and morph it into something.
Right.
My question to you is, because that's the $2 billion question,
that is the $2 billion
into
question.
what?
That is the $2 billion question, because I think we need to involve our students in that conversation, because you and I don't have the answer. No one does.
I certainly don't.
But
I was counting on you.
But it's going to be their challenge, and I think that for our students, it's actually an exciting time. When is it easiest to make change? In periods of chaos and flux. We're in it. We're in a serious period of chaos and flux. I don't want to get too political in this conversation, but what Donald Trump has done, he hasn't just reshuffled the cards. He's thrown the cards in the air. Someone's going to put them back together again into something. And I'm not sure he knows how to do that. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe there's a plan, but I'm not quite certain there is. So that will be up to the next generation of business leaders. And so I want to teach business students to be, what I say, stewards of the market. And it's funny, I can actually quote the conservative pundit Tucker Carlson on this. Tucker Carlson said, quote unquote, "Capitalism is a tool like a stapler gun or a toaster. If it's broken, fix it." And the idea that the system can continue to work without any kind of adjustments, any kind of efforts to, as Anand Giradhara says, smooth out its rough spots.
Right.
That's just nonsense. I mean, you're a dean of a school. Can this school continue to operate if no one is trying to manage the systems and the organization? No, it'll fall apart.
No, of course, yeah.
And so capitalism is the same thing. And
okay.
So I think
the cards have been thrown in the air, and they're, so now, we can, now is, as you say, chaos. So it is the opportunity to get all of those cards and stack them in a different manner than what they were put together before. Right. But the only thing I would say, which temper my, and I think you're right, that it's in period of crisis and in period of chaos that we can innovate and found things. And it's unfortunate that we have to go that far, but it is, history has told us that that's usually when things happen. The only thing I would say is that even recently, I remember when COVID-19 happened. I remember reading wishful thinking article about all of a sudden, of course, the CO2 emission went down because there was no activity. And, you could see wild animal here in Dublin, going through the streets of the city center and reclaiming a space that had been lost for,
Is that true?
Yeah. They escaped from the Phoenix Park, and because the Phoenix Park is right in the middle of the city and there was no car, they just started to venture all around. Now we have foxes anyway. We have foxes on the Trinity campus, so even though we're in the middle of the city, so they were kind of always there, but they really took the opportunity to wander around. And then people felt like, oh well, this is the opportunity to rethink, because we're spending time at home with our kids and pressure on work. It's it's not the same. And then what did you see? Within a year or two of post-COVID, the airline industry, we all, and I was guilty of it, like many others, let's go to Australia because we haven't been out of the house for 3 years. So everyone, let's go, and we did. And millions, thousands of people who had the means to do so have done the same. And but more importantly, business as usual came back very quickly and ferociously. So that's.
But let me offer a different stimulus that I think is at play right now, and that's insurance. Insurance markets are changing because of increased risk, increased severity, increased frequency of natural disasters. And it's not just the big sensational ones. It's what insurance companies call secondary perils. We have rainstorms. Now we have atmospheric rivers, and those cause damage to sewer systems. They cause periodic flooding. We have heat waves now that are causing highways to buckle. I mean,
so that's re-internalizing externalities, because the risk is so systemic to the system that it needs to be reintegrated in the capitalist system.
And it is altering the system.
Okay.
So you can.
Okay, so it's making its way back in.
And so I think that's a very important metric, because you could say climate change is not happening, but
very few people in Europe say that.
Yeah, I know.
I think a bit more in the US. I believe.
But if I monetize it for you.
Okay.
Deny it all you wish, but it's a fact that your insurance rates are going to reflect this. I mean, insurance companies are not making a political statement. They're looking simply at the numbers, and the numbers don't work.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So one area of hope is the fact that we need to educate people or trust the next generation, the current generation, to do a better job than we arguably did. So I'm going to turn now maybe to the topic of one of your latest book on the fact that business school in general have to own some level of responsibility for the system that you have described. And so the question I'm going to ask you is, what do business schools need to do in general to address those systemic problems? What is the role we should be playing? Then, I might even go further after. It's if you were the dean, what would you do? And then, I'll tell you whether or not I think it's feasible or not.
I'm gonna give you an answer.
Okay.
But I'm also going to say that my role right now, I'm not a dean.
Sure.
And so that allows me to play a very important role called the radical flank.
Of course.
I can push the boundary much further so that the center of the debate moves.
Yes.
So I'm going to say things.
That's why I'm delighted you're here and you're going to challenge me.
Yeah, so I'm going to say things and you can say, that's a great idea, it's just not possible. But at least I'm going to put it on the table.
That's very good, yeah.
So I think that we in business schools, in no particular order, let me walk through some ideas. We do need to take some responsibility for the kinds of graduates we've created.
Sure.
There is research, solid research, to show that students who apply to business school score high on the dark triad: narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism. There is solid research that says...
I actually, sorry, and just to cut you here, because I think you had a great anecdote when you were talking about the, what is it, Wall Street.
Yeah.
When people like starting, like if Wall Street was created or made, you know, so that people feel disgusted with this environment, and you said you have experienced students that actually went into business or because they saw Wall Street.
Right, the movie Wall Street and
Wolf of Wall Street is probably the same effect. My son is fascinated by this lifestyle.
This is what people think business is.
Yeah.
There's a corporate attorney, you can look this up, there's a great article he wrote. His name is James Gamble, and he wrote this article in Medium called The Biggest Problem in the World, I think that's what it's called. And his central point is that our business environment compels business leaders to act like a textbook example of sociopathic personality disorder. They only care about themselves, they only care about money, and they push the problems on everybody else. But I think there's a generational shift coming in. So I told you, this is who we attract, the dark triad. 2 years of an MBA, people become more selfish and more self-monitoring. They care more what people think of them.
Research shows that.
Research shows that. And then you see it on the other end. I mean, it's our graduates that caused the 2008 financial crisis. Have you heard any business school say, sorry about that?
That was thanks to us.
Maybe we should rethink this. And so I think that we need to take more of a responsibility for creating the kind of leaders that our world needs today. The nice thing is I think more and more students are coming in looking for that education, feeling a sense of purpose and calling to actually use business as a way to solve society's problems, which is getting back to Colin Meyer's definition. It's getting to Paul Pullman's definition of net positive. And so how do we create and cultivate those kinds of leaders is something that I think business schools, I'd like to take them that seriously. And that means they have to have an aspirational statement of what kind of world they want to see and not be afraid to say, we're going to create people that are going to do that. Within that, I think that we need to start to rethink some of the things we teach. Let's stop teaching that the purpose of the firm is to make money for the shareholder. Let's start to have a serious conversation over what is the proper balance between business and government in the market. We have a very dumb debate right now. It's either all or nothing. That doesn't work. Start to talk about limits to economic growth, alternative forms of growth. Stop teaching that nature is merely a resource for our supply chains. I could go on, but really rethink the core, and I just don't mean the core courses, but the overall concept of how we do business education. And I don't mean just rearrange the courses as they are. So you get a 2-year degree, you get 4 semesters per year, you get 4 courses per semester, so that's 32 courses. Let's figure out what those are going to be. Start to think about short-term modules, long-term modules. I was just at IMD, and they have what they call transversal skills, and they have like 6 skills at the beginning that they give these short modules that span through the entire curriculum. Sustainability is one of them. AI is another. Pattern recognition is another. These are all important things that span through. A really complete rethinking of the curriculum. And I also recognize that you as a dean, that is an unbelievable undertaking, because herding faculty is herding cats. I know exactly the environment that a dean lives in. But I think the role of dean has been undermined by the over expectation that they focus primarily on fundraising. That's certainly true in the United States.
Right.
And I've seen a clever way of handling that. Wake Forest for a while had 2 deans. They had an external dean and an internal dean. The external dean fundraising, and they got the former CEO of PepsiCo. Brilliant. The internal dean built the school. That makes sense to me. So how do you build a school that responds to student demands, responds to what society needs, and not be afraid to be different. Right now we have a monoculture. Every school is trying to be the same thing, driven by the rankings, driven by the reward systems, which are same at all schools. I saw a talk recently by David Brooks, and he said something that has just never left my mind. He said there are certain schools where you meet their graduates, you know they went there. And it's not just the skills they have, it's their worldview, their sense of place. How many business schools could say that? I don't think mine could. But what if you did? What would those students look like? Could you bring your faculty together and say, we're not just educating knowledge, we're forming character, we're forming integrity. What do those people look like? How do we create that? And then if people have a common vision, then you can start to build the course around that. Again, I don't envy a dean that challenge, but I think that's
no. I
what's
mean,
before us.
but you're right. I mean, I think there's some there's a lot of things in what you're saying that resonate with what we have tried to do for the last 4 or 5 years with our strategy of transforming business for good. And I mean, it does require, and there's a big level of inertia. Now in Europe, the other part of it
but
is
if I can say something,
Yeah.
I think if I understand the history of Trinity Business School,
yeah.
you really started to take off only like 10, 12, 15 years
Sure.
ago. So in many ways, you're a greenfield.
Exactly.
And
Well,
that's a huge opportunity.
Yes.
My school, it's a brownfield.
I know.
And the entrenched interests are very hard to
No,
dislodge.
and I know, and that's the opportunity that we have. And if you look at like what we've been able to do at undergrad, like in the area of sustainability, and some of the courses on postgrad, I don't think we would have been able to move like as fast as we have
Right.
in other institutions.
Right.
So
And-
we have embodied like a lot of module. We have those, those sets of skills that are embodied in the curriculum. There is kind of, and we are starting to see an effect of our strategy in the type of graduate that we attract. What, in other words, why, but it's a bit counterintuitive because the thing is for a business school in Europe, certainly mine, you don't go out and get like millions from CEO. This is not the tradition in Europe. You get your money in a business school from the fees of the student, and especially at postgraduate. Why do you do a postgraduate education? To specialize in a field and to get a job. And so if that value proposition is not there, then you don't have money to do the things that you want to do, and you literally have nothing to offer. So in other words, if we launch a program such as, and they are specialized program, maybe that was the wrong approach, but still we have one like this, an MSc in responsible business and sustainability, right? Very successful, a bit of philanthropy. Problem is like some of those graduate, even though I really do think it's a great, and we tackle on many of the points you have mentioned. I truly think it's a great degree, and but the market, or especially in the last 2 or 3 years, has shifted, and there's not a very high demand for those graduates. Now, we're not going to continue to bring graduates to throw them in the wall, and they are not going to be willing to pay anyway. Now, we have received scholarship for a number of places in that masters, but so that's one of the limits. Just one example.
Right.
So you have to be cognizant of that fact. And so when people come to us to do an MBA, for example, we have embodied like a lot of element. Now I'm the dean, and I don't go into the nitty-gritty of the module, but like there's one on climate action and leadership. In other words, it's leadership in challenging times, and it kind of tackle like what does it mean to be an ethical leader, taking into account like those things, but it's leadership. So there's a couple of other modules like that. They're all very interesting. At the end of the day, if the student come to get a job in Salesforce or in Microsoft, we produce certain type of graduate. I do think we're starting to see an effect as like in terms of like you be able to differentiate between a Trinity graduate and some other graduate, but it's never as drastic as you want it to be, because there are literally market constraints. So you're trying to change the market, like as if you want, or have an effect on it, a positive effect, but you are very much constrained by the fact that you are partaking in that market.
And I've focused on sustainability. It wasn't sustainability when I started; it was environmental issues. But leave that aside. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've really stopped talking about sustainability. because I think that the real question before us is what's the next variant of capitalism, and how do we develop the kind of business leaders we need for the 21st century?
Yeah.
That can be sustainability, it can be anything. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that. And I think that that is the challenge before us, and it's a challenge for all of higher education. There is a growing debate. Derek Bach, former president of Harvard, Shapiro, I'm blanking on his first name, Harold Shapiro, president of Princeton, Anthony Crumman, the dean of the Yale Law School, have all been written about David Brooks has written about this, that universities used to help people develop a meaningful philosophy of life. We don't do that anymore. We just give you skills to get a job. And we are doing students a disservice, particularly undergraduate students. When students do an undergraduate business degree at that formative stage where they're trying to figure out who they are and what their character is, and we're teaching them it's all about money.
No.
We're doing them a tremendous disservice. So how do we create the kind of thoughtful leaders? Because I think that's a problem for higher education writ large, but it's a bigger problem for business schools because our graduates have such a disproportionate influence on society. So if we're producing people that don't care about anything but money, we're going to have the kind of leadership we have today.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and I think we're certainly for us, we are particularly pleased with like the changes that we've made to our curriculum. That being said, you know, especially the first year, we have like built a lot of emphasis on like, and I'm not sure the course is called. It's business and nature. So it's basically like how do you link those two ecosystems, the business ecosystem and the natural ecosystem. And it's being taught by people who are both part of the business community, but also scientists and naturologists that, you know, be able to actually educate people, business people, on like on biodiversity,
and I'll bet your
and
students
that's really
are eating it up.
So that's really important. But you do get like the odd criticism of students who said, "Listen, I did come. I came here to do a business degree, and like, you know, 3 of my module out of 8 in first year are not really business related module because they talk about like those wider issues." So listen, that's fine, and it's a balance.
I was a chemical engineer undergrad, and I didn't want to take quantum physics. Too bad I had to take it.
No, that's fine. So, but and we're very fortunate that most of our students are very engaged in the topic and you know and embrace it, and we see it in the last year of their study when they have to do a capstone project. A lot of them veer towards the topic of innovation and sustainability, you know, nature-based economy. Of course, there's plenty of other topics that they might choose from, but you know, there's quite a demand for this.
And I would add one more thing. I mean, most business schools evaluate the success of their programs by the job out of the gate.
Well, that's what ranking.
Yeah, but you know what's an even important metric? Are you satisfied with a college degree 10, 15, 20 years? Did it launch you and give you what you need to live, I don't want to say happy life per se, but a meaningful life? If it did, that's a good college education.
Well, maybe that's we'll have to liaise back with our friends from the ranking agency and say, listen, can you put your survey with like people 20 years down the line?
Some schools have tried to track that
and tell us like how they feel about.
There are some surveys that do that, and some schools satisfaction at the beginning is low and then it takes off, while other satisfaction is high and it plateaus.
No, and I'm not surprised that's the case. I don't think we monitored that far. So I literally wouldn't be able to tell you what is the sentiment, only that I know that all graduates tend to have like you know, a positive emotional attachment to this institution.
And you know, you talked about counterintuitive outcomes. When I got to the University of Michigan in 2004, we were known as a school that created community-focused team players. And then something funny happened. We were ranked number 1 in the Wall Street Journal rankings. Suddenly we were attracting a different kind of student, the prima donna that just wanted money. And we had recruiters who were saying, what's going on here? This isn't what we come to Michigan for. And so be careful what you wish for.
Okay. No, that's a good point. And I listen, there's been, as you say, since our development as a graduate, certainly as a graduate business school, has been relatively recent over the last 10 years. You know, in the course of that development, there was debate as to whether or not we should enter this ranking game
Yeah.
at all. And of course, like the problem is that for now, and I would have been one of the person who would have said, listen, ranking is great if they are a true indication and validation of your strategy.
Right.
And I think I still believe that.
Didn't I read in Poets and Quants that your applications are going way up?
But that's the thing. So
Yeah.
our application were from the US,
Yeah.
certainly, which is and then the journalist that was interviewing me in Poets and Quants was asking whether or not it was a result of our transforming business for good strategy and the change of our curriculum, and I'm not sure,
Yeah.
So and I think there's an element of that for sure, and we see it. We see, anecdotally that some people that in the interview and when I meet them, I came because I thought, what you were doing, and that really resonated with me. And of course, there's a sizable proportion that comes for political reason because they don't like to see what's happening in the US. They may be the same people, and then some people who see the business ecosystem of Dublin and say, well, I want the best business school or best university so that I can work in the Dublin ecosystem, and of course we're a good choice. But the problem is so once you get into the ranking, once any variation will be picked up, and obviously if it's a variation downward, even though there may be plenty of explanation precisely because you are applying the strategy that you are focusing on and not stupidly, may I say, follow the benchmark of what the ranking agency and they have put together. You have a negative backlash, and that's so that's the risk, and that's so it's
and the rankings, the idea that
so it's very addictive in a way.
The idea that I can give you one number that says how good the degree is from Trinity College Dublin is absurd. It's patently absurd. And the idea that there's only one metric, that everyone wants to be the same thing, that's absurd too.
That is absurd.
There should be a diversity. We should have a diverse culture, not a monoculture.
It's actually even worse than that. If you want to go into the metric, and I'll speak a bit freely there. It has, if you look at it's not only that everyone is following the same criteria, but obviously that leads to extreme homogenization. Of the type of student we're recruiting. Now, if you look at one of the ranking, for example, is international. So you need to have international faculty. You need to have international students, but you also need the revenue that goes with it, and you need to pay those faculty. The end result is that any business school that I've been in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you've got 50%, 60% of people who are international. Same ratio for the student. Is it diversity? No, it's extremely homogeneous. It's every business school is becoming a bit more the same.
And where
a French dean, a French citizen managing an Irish business school, and then I have met colleagues who are from Ireland and are managing a French school, and the mix of students, and and the mix of students in the end is relatively the same, and that's one of the irony where we're following this. And
have you seen?
And actually, sorry, and just to finish, the big risk of this is that it might sometimes decontextualize the business school. So you've got this global elite group of business students in particular that are in France, Ireland, Singapore, the US. And then on the ground, the society is still what it is. So that's, thankfully, we have undergrad and postgrad, so we can differentiate, and we're very local at undergrad level, and we want to remain local. But at postgrad and some other business schools are even more international than us. That dichotomy, I think, is dramatic because that leads to a complete misunderstanding between the society, as in that geographically bounded place of a particular country and this global elite that can move from one place to the other. And that's a side effect of what was originally a very good intention of bringing international experience.
And once you become dependent on them in a fluid environment, you become very vulnerable to changes like we're seeing in the United States.
Yeah.
I was going to say, have you, Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast called Revisionist History. And he has 2 episodes, I think it's 2 episodes. The U.S. News and World Report is a very influential ranking of universities. And they won't tell you how they do it. That's their secret sauce. So he hired some people to sort of do back engineer it.
Sure.
And they did sensitivity analysis. And it's stunning what random variables can tweak their rankings radically. Listen to it. It's quite an entertaining episode.
Okay, I will. Okay. Okay, so we've talked. You've given me advice, or at least you've given your opinion as to what business schools should do, and you've been pretty clear about what business and the business community should do, and essentially veer away from shareholder capitalism. And in passing, you have mentioned like Unilever was tried or attempted to change from that model, but you know the examples are still relatively limited. I don't know if you want to go back to that point, or should we move to the last point maybe of our conversation? Like, what advice do you have for students so that they can manage their lives, thrive in their life, and possibly, and because we think that's still the case, have a positive impact on their environment and on the environment.
Right. My advice for business students is, number one, recognize, in my mind, business schools are broken, and that they aren't serving society as they're needed. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Number two, go anyway. The power you have to make a difference in the world through business is enormous. But number three, do not be a passive consumer of your education. Take an active role in making it what you want it to be. You're going into a resource-rich environment, whether it's knocking on other doors in the business school or going to other schools at the university. Don't be afraid to do an independent study, organize a conference, invite a speaker, build your network. There are so many ways to ad-lib your education. And students who come in and say, okay, I'm here, give me my 2-year degree, tell me what courses to take. If you think you got your best education, you didn't. And so make it what you want it to be, make it what you need to be. And then you will get out of it what you need to get out of it. And it's not a totally failed institution by any means. I think that it's just tremendous inertia.
Well, listen, Andy, thank you for saying that. I mean, I obviously, in my role, I would naturally challenge like the fact that business schools are broken. But let
me say though that my saying that it comes out of a place that I really care about this institution. I'm not here just saying, I'm not a cynic. I'm just trying to call out, and I'm doing it extreme because you got to push things off of the comfort zone, and I'm open to being challenged. I'm open to being told I'm wrong, but I do think that there needs to be a correction for the sake of society and for the sake of the graduates we're creating that will have this tremendous influence on society.
Yeah, I agree with you, and certainly, that's what we're trying to do in this business school. Whether we do enough of it is
but it's a journey. It's a journey.
Something that we can debate. Yeah. But in any case, before we wrapped up, is there anything else that you wish we had talked about today? That it's like I wish Laurent had asked me about that question, because there's so much. I know you've written more than 100 outlets, so we could spend hours. But is there something that you feel we really missed out on this part of the conversation?
Something that's become really important for me and my identity as a professor, and what I want to do in my role as a professor is help students develop a sense of their calling, their vocation, their purpose. I think that our students are open to this idea. And so I run a program where I take students on a weekend retreat out into the woods. I take away their cell phones and computers, and I guide them through exercises to discern their purpose in life. There's a quote from Mark Twain. He says, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. The day you're born, you had no choice. Your parents made it for you. That second day, you have to find it. It's not going to just drop from on high. You have to actually do some effort to find what that is. And too many of our students, in the words of the book that came out of a professor from Yale about 10 years ago, they're excellent sheep. They're really smart, but they're looking for external affirmation. They've lost that internal sense of who they are.
Of purpose,
we need to help them get that back. And then they will lead much more meaningful lives. And those are the kind of people we want in business, and those are the kind of people we want in society.
A very good and vast agenda, and I hope, I know you have contributed greatly to putting it on the map and helping your student, helping the business community, helping the business school community to change and to
invite me back to Dublin. I'll help your students do it too.
Okay, I will do that. Andy, thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
your contribution. It was great talking to you.
Great talking to you
too. Thank you very much.